Reflections of a Poll Clerk. Hey folks, Eric from Another Voice with Eric and Friends. Yesterday was South Carolina's Democratic and Republican primaries, and I spent the day working as a poll clerk, heading up a polling precinct all day. And I just wanted to take a few minutes to reflect on what I experienced yesterday, some thoughts overall. I want to start with what a fantastic election office we have in Greenville County. Conway Belongia, the Director of Elections, and the staff over there does a fantastic job of getting everything ready, working hard to make things smooth and efficient. They make it so that the workers like us can effectively do the job that they want us to do. And there were some glitches yesterday, I heard, from a couple precincts, but they were fixed. And we'll talk about that in a minute too. But for the most part, Greenville County elections run smoothly. There's humans involved, and there's going to be mistakes. We'll talk about that too. But overall, the election office there has so many checks and balances from before the machines and the information goes out, while we're there at the polls, the things we have to do, and then at the end of the night. And let me tell you, there are a huge number of people, volunteers, who help at all ends. So I'm just very, very pleased to be able to be working in Greenville County. And I had a couple of great helpers. Emily and Frank did fantastic work. So pleased to have them working with us. And we had some great local restaurants. Little Pig's Barbecue on Hudson Road, Domino's, Wade Hampton and Greer, and Substation 2 on Wade Hampton and Taylor's all donated food, lunch, and supper for both the precinct I was working in for us, our workers, and for the precinct that my daughter was working for in Taylor's. And I want to thank them for that. So that was some good things. I was glad to see people who came out to vote who knew what they were voting for. There were a number of people who had papers in their hands with who they were voting for. There were people who came in and they were in that booth seconds. And on that Republican ballot, there were lots of offices, lots of people, and some questions. And they knew what they were voting for. They knew what it was all about. So it was great to see that. And I have to say that something that I see every time, every election, and it just warms my heart, and it's a chastisement to anyone, in my opinion, that complains about having to go out to vote. The majority of our voters were older. I would say the majority were 60 and older, maybe 55 and older. And there were a number of people who came out to vote yesterday with walkers and canes, and you could see that they were in at least a little bit to a lot of pain, but there was no way in the world that they were going to miss an election. And these folks just were inspiration. They knew what they were doing, and they voted. Now let's talk about some things that I wasn't so happy about. The biggest concern is turnout. Now I know that traditionally, turnout for primaries in the last few decades has been traditionally low. 20% would be a benchmark that in a hotly contested gubernatorial race, 22% I think is what came out. In my precinct, when I worked at, we had 12.3% of registered voters come out to vote. In another one I heard, they had 10%. I think the highest I heard, my daughter said she had 19% of registered voters come out and vote. Now, it could vary across the county, but honestly, that is sad. In this particular primary, there was a U.S. Senate race with 7 candidates in the Republican primary. There's a superintendent of education race with 8 Republican candidates, 4 Democratic candidates. There were at least 2 other races in the Democratic primary that had 2 to 3 candidates. And in some of the other races in the Republican primary, there were 3 to 4 candidates. This is the time to make choices. And in November, when you complain, oh, there's no good choices today, I want you to think back where you were on June 10th from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Because that's why there are no good choices. Folks, we need to get out and get involved. But along that line, about the fact that there were just less than 20% who actually voted, I want to point out something. We tend to say, we tend to ignore the fact of the turnout when we make points. For example, I read something today that someone said 80% of Republican voters want the state income tax reduced to 0. That's impressive. It's not accurate, but it's impressive. 80% of the individuals who voted in the Republican primary wanted income tax reduced to 0. Now, it may be that 80% of Republicans do want the income tax gone, but we can't say that accurately because it's 80% of less than 20%. And understand, that is if every single person who voted yesterday voted in the Republican primary, which we know they didn't because they were Democratic voters. So when we say things, we need to be accurate. Even in a presidential election, when we say, oh, 60% of the people believe this. Well, no, it's 60% of the people who voted. So it's not 80% of Republicans who want the sales tax gone. I also want to talk about problems. There were a few precincts where apparently early in the morning, there were wrong ballots selected. Now, someone misunderstood what this meant, that they were saying that the machines didn't have the correct ballots on them. No, what happened, as it appears, is that some poll workers made mistakes in selecting the wrong ballot choice on the machine. And so there were, from what I heard, about 100 and some voters who did not get to vote in the ballot that they expected to vote. Now, before I say anything else, let me make sure that shouldn't happen. When you go to vote, you should be able to vote for the people you were supposed to be able to vote for. Now, obviously, if a candidate's not running in your district, you should be able to vote for them. But if you're supposed to vote for somebody, you should get that right. And that didn't happen yesterday. But I also want to be quick to point out that some people are saying, oh, look, this is a flaw in the system. We've got these terrible machines. No, people. Humans made mistakes. Now, we need to stop that. We need to avoid that in the future. We need to correct what we can. Now, to be fair, the races that were most concerned about this, those 110, 104, whatever votes, would not have made a difference. The incumbent won 80-some percent to like 8%. So even if every single person who didn't get to vote on that ballot had voted, it wouldn't have changed it. But it needs not to happen. But I want to point out what was a good thing. The candidates who were getting calls about, hey, I didn't get to vote for you. Where were you? Why wasn't it on the ballot? Rather than wait and do nothing about it, or just whine and complain about it, they contacted the Greenville Voter Registration Office and said, hey, well, what's going on here? And working together with the Greenville County Voter Registration Office, they fixed it. In years past, I have heard candidates complaining after the election was over about discrepancies and problems that happened at polling places. There's nothing that can be done then. But if there's anything Conway Belanger, the Director of Elections, is committed to, is to make sure elections are done right. So I would urge any candidates, and I would urge any voters, if there's any inconsistency, if there's any problem in your voting precinct, and it doesn't seem to be able to be resolved by the people there, every polling place has a phone number to the elections office. Call them and deal with it. Try to get it fixed right then. But one final thing about this, voters, you and I have a responsibility when we vote, to vote right. If you're going to vote, and you know John Smith is someone you want to vote for because he's going to run for the office that you want in State County Council, and you go to vote, and you're looking at your ballot, and John Smith doesn't appear. Excuse me, before you push the vote button, say, I'm sorry, why isn't John Smith appear on my ballot? Now, I had this happen years ago at election, the candidate I expected to be there wasn't there. What I found out is that district lines have been redrawn, and that candidate was no longer in. I was no longer in their district. But I asked about it before I pushed my vote button. We have a responsibility that when we go to vote, to pay attention to what we're voting on. If there's a discrepancy, if there's a problem, ask about it, talk about it. Then, don't wait and whine for 2 days afterwards and complain to your friends and go on Facebook and all this stuff. Nothing can happen. But even then, if you haven't said anything at the polling place, even a day later, even 2 days later, if there's something that was wrong, contact the voter registration office. They want to fix this. Okay. Overall, I really enjoy working as a poll clerk. I enjoy helping people be able to vote. My takeaway from yesterday is we have some great people in this county that really do want to do things to help us be able to elect our officials. We've got to get people out to vote. 15%, 20% of registered voters, which equals to 5 or 6 or 7% of eligible voters, is not enough. But let me tell you, you don't want to vote in the primaries. Understand, you gave us the power to pick who you have as a choice. You gave up your power. So folks, let's get out and vote. Now, we got an election coming in November. Let's get ready for it. We've got time to study the candidates. Well, actually, I'll tell you what, we've got a runoff coming up in 2 weeks in Superintendent of Education in both parties and possibly some other ones. If you voted in this primary, pay attention and don't say, well, I'm not going to vote again. Vote to get your point across. If you didn't vote in the primary, you can still vote in the runoff. Get out there and let's vote and make a difference, folks. Let's make a difference in our community by getting our voice heard. All right, this has been Another Voice with Eric and Friends. You can hear us on Monday evenings. We put our podcast out at canigetawordin.com. You can also go to Another Voice with Eric and Friends, and at Facebook at Another Voice with Eric and Friends, YouTube at Be Another Voice, and Twitter at Be Another Voice. And until we talk again, get out in the community and make a difference.